Hey, we are back. And because I've recorded videos many times and realized I wasn't recording, I just checked. And yes, we're recording. So yay. And today I want to just talk to you about something that I've honestly never really heard talked about. In fact, I feel like it might even be slightly avoided because no one really knows the real solution to it. And so I talk to so many women that want to stop dieting, but they don't know how, or they don't know what that even looks like because it's all they've ever known, right? So, this idea of food freedom or just not being on some sort of diet is not only foreign to them, but it's actually pretty scary because all their brain has ever known is what it's like to count or measure or restrict or put foods in like good, bad, should, shouldn't categories, or their brain knows what it's like to bounce to the opposite end of the spectrum and end up in that uncontrollable cycle of, mindless eating, emotional eating, stress eating, binging, you name it. And they just end up feeling super out of control of food, right? But again, like not being on something, it scares them. And because when they're not on, they feel totally off. And you can imagine it's one massive vicious cycle and downward spiral. So I want to address this head on in today's video. Okay. Now, I want you to know that I know what this feels like to a T because I've been there myself. Like, this isn't just me spewing information at you. I was stuck in my own food and body and shame prison for decades. Like, literally my whole life, since I was 8 years old, I was on some sort of diet. And from there on out, food became personal and food became emotional. And it's also when I started viewing food as something that needed to be weighed or measured or accounted for or just obsessed over, or again, like fit in that category of good, bad, right, wrong, should, shouldn't, unhealthy, healthy, on plan, off plan, like you name it, right? And it just got worse from there. And so eventually for me, I hit my first, because there was many of them, I hit my first like enough is enough point. And through a lot of the wrong ways and some of the right ways, I went on and lost close to 100 pounds. But here's the thing. I learned the same eat less, move more equation that you learned. And even though, yeah, I did technically lose the weight, I never addressed my addiction to food and sugar. And I felt like I was a slave to dieting or a slave to exercise. And because I never addressed the self image and the body image and the wiring in my brain that was causing me to think and act and feel and behave like I was fat or unworthy or a failure or destined to stay this way forever or whatever, painful words I was using at the time. Yeah, I lost the weight, but I brought all of my old habits, thinking, and behaviors with me into my future, right? And also, just like you, and just like we're going to talk about in this video, the idea of not being on something or feeling totally off the rails if I was not on something, it felt totally foreign and really flippin' scary to me. And so it kept me chained to diets and disordered eating and this toxic relationship with food in my body. And that's why I feel like it's just so important that we actually talk about this, right? So, a little disclaimer before we get into it. This one video is not going to magically solve your sugar binging problem or your, can't stick to anything long-term problem or your like, screw it, I don't care, just give me the chocolate cake problems, right? Like, this is not a quick fix or a band-aid. And it's definitely not going to be tips on how to, tighten up your diet or train even harder, right? This is not that. Like, everything that I share is a less is more approach. But also, I really want you to get that, like, healing your relationship with food and getting off that toxic diet roller coaster, it will never happen if you're playing that game of obsession and restriction or, making foods off limits, or if you're just approaching it as if it's a food problem altogether, right? Because here's what we know, like it really is. And despite what you think, it really is possible to smash decades of disordered eating and binge eating and body image struggles if you know how to pull it from its root and just deal with it once and for all. And I promise you, yes, you can do all of that without needing years of therapy or opening up an emotional can of worms. And we're going to talk about how to heal it once and for all so that you can just go live your life and you can get your life back, right? And like spend your time and money and heart and soul and mental real estate on what you really want to be spending it, not on this, right? So let's talk about that because the world is throwing more diets at this internal struggle, right? And we talked about that before, like, and I don't want you to feel bad or shame yourself if you have fallen prey to this or just kind of gotten seduced by the claims, because I did too, like more times than I can count. And it's very easy and it's very human of you too, right? So no shame and no judgment. Okay. But we do definitely want to become aware of where we are more or less like trying to solve our internal struggles with yet another diet or trying to like out diet a deeper problem, right? Because that will only just, dig us further in the hole. And, I remember thinking like, oh, like if I just give up carbs and get on keto or, start intermittent fasting like one more time, right? That maybe this is the time that it will actually be different. Or, convincing myself to just like obsessively track or weigh or measure, and that like maybe that all of that like control that would end my sugar binges, right? Or like for me, the big one was like, okay, I'm just gonna go back to Weight Watchers for the like umpteenth time, and maybe this will actually work this time, right? But in reality, the cycle just kept on repeating itself. And it makes sense too. I mean, like every expert is telling you, every expert was telling me, again, do something different, like count carbs and fast, or don't eat after 7, or, count, track, weigh, measure, fake it till you make it, all the things, right? And again, all this does is confuse us and it paralyzes us, because then we get to that point where we're like, what should we be doing? Like, we feel damned if we do, damned if we don't, right? So when it comes to stopping that cycle, I can't even tell you how many women I talk to that when I talk about just like the concept or the idea of getting off that roller coaster and healing the problem and learning a new language around food so that you don't have to constantly think about it and obsess and stress, and food can just be food. Like the idea of food being food, to so many women, that's like, okay, yeah, that sounds great, Leanne, but I can't even imagine that, right? I can't even fathom that, because this has been so deeply ingrained in my brain for so long, right? And on top of that, because diets and short-term band-aids are so readily available, and they don't know that healing like this is actually an option, they do what I did, and they hop back onto the next diet and the next diet. Again, that's what I did for 30 years, right? And it's that diet mentality that causes all of the binging and feeling out of control, or saying, screw it, like what's the point? I'm never going to heal this anyways, or whatever your version of that food and diet prison is, right? Chronic dieting just makes it worse, and it causes us to go even deeper into the cycle of the diet cycle, because again, we're so scared of what will happen if we don't, right? It's kind of like that prison of control. And even though it makes us miserable, it does kind of in ways feel safer than getting out of it. Like it almost feels comfortable, right? And like, even though it's so flippin' uncomfortable, it's again, like the devil that you know versus the devil that you don't know. So we stay stuck in it, and it can make a sane woman feel a little insane, right? Like doing the same thing over and over again, and trying to solve a problem with that same brain that created it. Again, that's what I was doing for so long. And so we're going to address the big things that come up, which is, like I said, most women, not only can they just not even picture what not dieting looks like, but there's the other side of it, that even if they did have the perfect solution, they've lost so much trust in themselves from trying so many things that they didn't finish or that flat out didn't work. And they get to that point where they have no trust and no faith, and oftentimes like no respect for themselves at the end of it. And they think like, great, I've tried everything, and like there's something else that didn't work, or maybe it'll work for somebody else, but like this will not work for me. And basically it's kind of like that fear or that skepticism that anything will work for them, and it rears its head big time when we go to start something, right? It's even conversations like this. So before we dive in, I really want to speak into that, because like, what good is it what I have to share and what to say, what I have to say to you, if you don't even believe that it'll work, right? And you know what? To me, that actually shows me that your brain is getting smarter. Okay. Your brain knows that another eat less, move more solution is not going to fix this problem, and then it would be more of the same. And that's exactly why you have to take a radically different approach this time around. One where you begin with the end in mind and actually fix the problem, and like close the open loop in your brain, the open loop of dieting, right? Because at the end of the day, like, let's just say I straight up could give you my stressless eating strategy that I give my clients, right? But if we don't go identify those like weeds in the garden of your mind that are sabotaging you or keeping you from trusting yourself, or just straight up setting you up to fail before you even begin, it wouldn't matter what I have to share with you. And you would end up right back where you are right now, because you can't, again, out diet, out strategize, or outperform that, right? And that is not a food problem. And that's exactly why you have to start at the self-image. And that's exactly why actually you need both. And so when I say both, I mean like you need a new strategy so that the food side of things just becomes simple and stressless and sustainable. And the key word here is sustainable, right? But also like the brain and the self-image that you're going to need to actually make all that happen. Or else you're right, like this time won't be any different and nothing will ever change. And I hope you're taking that with so much love because I really do mean it with so much love. But basically, like what I'm saying is this, like your healthy skepticism and fears like that this will just be one more thing that doesn't work, it actually is a good thing. Like it's your brain's way of telling you like you have to take a radically different approach to address it this time around. Because again, it's kind of like understanding that like another diet won't fix this, right? And here's the other thing. I can promise you this. What I'm about to share with you here today, and really the stressless eating system that I teach my clients, and I can say this with 100% certainty, it's not something that you've ever failed at before because you've never tried it before, right? You've never started at healthy and started at happy and healed your relationship with food in your body, right? You've never taken the radically different approach that you need to fix this for good. And what I'm about to share with you, it does. It works for absolutely every woman who puts in the work and heals her brain from the brain damage of chronic dieting. Because all dieting does is contribute to and create more of that brain damage that in reality, that's what needs to be healed. Okay. So that's the first part that I really wanted you to hear. And here's a reality. Like, I'm not here to persuade you or convince you or coerce you that you are helpable or that you're not truly stuck, right? I'm simply inviting you to just suspend your disbelief and open your eyes and open your heart to what is possible, like what you can't see that you can't see, right? But also, like, if you really have tried everything and you feel like, hey, like, I know what to do, but I can't get myself to actually do it or follow through with it, like, can I just challenge you on that for a minute and ask, like, what if you actually don't know what to do, right? What if you simply learned the whole diet mentality and the broken model of, eat less, move more that I learned and that we all learned? And that now is the time to open your mind to the possibility that like your solution really is in your blind spot, but it's not in another diet and it's not in another exercise plan, right? And the reason you haven't been able to fix this on your own is because you don't know what you don't know and you can't see what you can't see. And you are going to need some guidance to show you what's in your blind spot. And honestly, that's exactly what this video is designed to do. So if you're open to that, then that's good because what I'm going to do is I'm going to just simplify this for you, right? And again, like this might not be the, how to tips and tricks and band-aids that you might be thinking that you want, because let's be honest, tips and tricks don't work, right? And you don't need more information or a how-to list. You need a whole new way to think about your problem and a major mindset shift. And so that's what I'm going to do, right? I'm going to just give it to you straight because again, that's what I wish somebody had done with me. And I wish somebody had just given it to me straight. Like even when I was a kid, I wish I had heard this stuff, right? So I'm going to share 5 specific things. And I've gotten into a lot more of these, like of the 5 things, there's a lot more specifics on most of these things on other seasons of my podcast. But really, again, like we're just here to bottom line it. And here's what has to happen if you want to heal this. And if you want to stop dieting, but you have no idea what that even looks like, I'm going to lay it all out here for you, starting with the first step. Okay. So step number 1 is you have to acknowledge that it's a problem. Okay. So here's the reality. No one takes the time and the effort and the energy to solve a problem that they don't even acknowledge or admit that they have, right? And no one gets the help that they need if they don't even know that they have a problem. And that's also where the shame comes in, right? So shame, it causes us to just like feel broken or feel like messed up or just ashamed because we have thoughts of like, this is just who I am, or this is what I do. And that feels shameful. Like we are less than in some way, or we're disappointing people, right? But they might not even know because it's a secret. So I'm here to just invite you to simply relinquish that shame and just acknowledge that like you learned what I learned, right? And the world is throwing more of that at you. So it makes sense that you learned it. And let's just start having love and compassion instead of like that shame. And let's take that energy that we're using to shame ourselves and focus that energy on healing. Okay. So if you do struggle with overeating, so, generally speaking, but like whether that's binge eating or stress eating or mindless eating or, filling some sort of void with food, emotional eating, right? Or maybe you're just always thinking about food. So maybe you're like constantly daydreaming about it because you're starving from trying to diet, right? Or maybe you're obsessing over it because you're like really trying to track it or count it, right? Or maybe you're just like, you've gotten into the habit of judging yourself, like before you eat, during eating, after you eat. or just in general, it just feels like food has this control over you and more so than you control it, right? Or maybe you're just always thinking about your weight or your body. And sometimes it does feel like a mild obsession, right? And I've been in all these places, right? Or if you just feel stuck on this on again, off again, black, white, all or nothing roller coaster with your body and food. And you feel like, okay, I'm strong 1 minute, but the next minute, like I'm a knee jerk reaction away from being pint deep in a tub of Ben and Jerry's or like caught in a Netflix binge, right? Or maybe you just feel like your relationship with food, like you know it in the back of your mind. First of all, it's costing you your health, but it's also costing you your happiness. And sometimes it feels like it's costing you your sanity. Then this is a really big problem. And in order to heal it, you must identify that it's a really big problem, but it's not a food problem or a diet problem or a willpower problem, right? It's a mind and brain and self-image problem. And the problem is living inside of the paradigm that you're living in and the goggles that you're seeing yourself through and making decisions with every single day, right? And if you're watching this video right now, it's most likely taking over your life in some way, right? If you're like obsessing about food or obsessing about what you're going to wear, or maybe you're just not present in your life, or you're like totally in your head about your body and missing out on your life and showing up as this like shrunken version of yourself or sitting on the sidelines of your life, and what you truly want to be and like who you know you are deep down is confident and powerful, and you want to be able to feel comfortable in your own skin, then just remember, like that will never come from dieting. And let me just repeat that actually, like that will never come from dieting. Okay. It has to come from a shift in your head and your heart and your brain. It has to. Okay. And that's why, in order to heal that, you have to acknowledge that this is a really big problem. And again, I just want to identify shame is the big thing that keeps us from acknowledging that it is indeed a big problem. But regardless, that is the first step. Okay. Step 2 is you must commit to healing it. So notice I didn't say go on another diet or commit to losing weight, right? Big difference. You have to commit to healing it. And, disordered eating and the self-image and body image that comes alongside it, like it really is like a cancer, and you have to cut it out. Like it doesn't go away on its own. It doesn't heal itself. In fact, it gets worse and it festers if you don't address it, right? And that's why you must commit to healing it, like not just hiding behind that weight loss stuff anymore. You've got to radically commit to transforming the way that you think. Okay. And this is where it's also really important to say that like you can't do this alone. Like if you could have done it by now, you would have, right? And I've seen so many women try to fix this on their own. And if you've spent years trying to fix this on your own and it hasn't worked, like this is why, right? You've got to get the support that you need. And this isn't the kind of thing that you can do on your own. And you can't solve it with information alone either, right? Because the solution lives in your blind spot and you can't solve the problem with that same brain that created it. But once you've committed to healing the real problem, then you're ready for step number 3, which is like, you've got to, I'm going to say this, but I'll explain it, right? You've got to treat it like a skill or like a new language. Okay. And so if you're anything like me or the clients that I work with, you've probably learned the language of eat less, move more, and the language of the diet mentality. And it's become the language that you're now like fluent in, for lack of a better way of saying it. Right. And it's this language that once you learn to speak it, you see your entire life through those goggles. And that's why the idea of not being on a diet, it seems so foreign and so scary. Right. And so in terms of healing this, like you have to look at it like it's learning a new language. So like, let's say you've been metaphorically speaking Spanish your whole life, or however long you've been on the diet mentality. And for real, think of it like the diet mentality is its own language, right? So the language of like eat less, move more, or calories in, calories out, or, just have more willpower, motivation, or like good, bad, right, wrong, shouldn't, right? It's a language of restriction and deprivation and punishment. And then shame, the big one, shame, right? As in, yes, like we learn to speak shame and see ourselves through shame. And that becomes our fluent language. And so it becomes the emotional home that we live in, right? And so you've got to go rewire your brain and learn a new language, okay? And so the way that I describe it, like, again, if you've been metaphorically speaking Spanish, right, AKA the diet mentality your whole life, or however long you've been speaking it, your brain doesn't know French, right? If you've been speaking Spanish, you don't know French. But once you start learning French, your brain lays down a map for French, right? But also the more recency your brain has for French and the less you speak Spanish, the foggier Spanish gets if you don't practice it, right? And that's exactly how I describe the language of stressless eating and this idea of, food freedom. Like take the time to learn the language one time, like invest the time and energy and the heart and the soul one time to have this language for the rest of your life. But It's a language that gets easier the more you practice it, and you get better at it the more you practice it, so that you can practice it less and less and it just becomes who you are. Versus again, dieting, which gets harder the more you practice it and you get worse at it the more you practice it, and we never get good at dieting, right? Okay. So gotta learn it like a new language. Okay. And this next one, step number 4, we've talked about a lot in the last video actually, but step number 4 is you've got to ditch the short-term gratification trap of, short-term weight loss and start prioritizing long-term health. Okay. So this is where you really have to shift your thinking. And one of the first questions I ask women to know if they're really ready to heal their struggles forever versus just put a short-term band-aid on it is, what is your biggest priority right now, right? Is it losing weight right now at the expense of losing it, gaining it, just to have the weight loss right now? Or is it to take, like a bigger, or is it, I should say, a bigger priority for you? So option 2 would be like, take the time to heal this like for good now so that you never have to deal with it again. And you can just be done with this now and forever, right? And there's no judgment either way, but it's a really important question to ask. And I invite you to ask yourself this question because, moving in the direction of more of the weight loss mentality and the diet mentality, it's going to give you more of the same, right? It's the same short-term gratification trap, but there's always that bounce back effect where, yeah, like you have the results for a little while, but then you have to give them back, right? So you really have to shift your thinking about where this is, not just about who you want to be 6 weeks from now or a month from now. This is about like, who do you want to be a year from now and 5 years from now and 10 years from now and 20 years from now, right? Like, let's get optimistic when you're 110, right? Like, what kind of woman do you want to be? What kind of friend and mother and sister and wife and all the roles that you play in your life? Like, who do you want to show up as in your life, right? And before you even ask that, like, what kind of partner do you want to be to yourself, right? Like, who do you want to be living in that brain of yours, right? So really it's about shifting from that short-term gratification trap. And that's what, strictly focusing on weight loss really is, to really taking on this mindset of, again, I'm going to learn the language one time, but it's going to serve me for the rest of my life. And this is a long-term forever conversation. And again, I get it. It's not as sexy as lose 20 pounds in 20 minutes, but it's the conversation that you must enter into if you really want your freedom. Okay. And that brings us to step number 5. And that is you have to create your own recipe. Okay. So back when I was at the height of my struggles and like the deepest of my darkness, I was dying for somebody to just like tell me what to do and tell me what to eat. Heck, like tell me who to be, right? Like tell me how to feel. But that was a big part of the problem because I can't tell you what your food freedom and body freedom and confidence and happiness recipe is, right? You have to discover it. Like I can give you the system and the framework, but we've got to individualize it for you if you want it to work for you, right? So no one can give you a cookie cutter one size fits all recipe. And that's why if somebody is trying to tell you like exactly what to eat or exactly what to do, like I would invite you to run far and run fast, because not only will you not be able to do that forever, but your brain will never discover what freedom feels like. And you'll never truly rewire your brain for freedom. And I get it, ladies, like no one is talking about this kind of stuff. And everyone is throwing another, macro counting, carb cutting, food-based weight loss chasing approach at a much deeper problem. But if there's one mistake I made that I wish I had figured out sooner, it would be thinking that like this would just fix itself, or that I would like outgrow it as I got older. Or if somebody would just give me the air quotes, like perfect plan, like then it would just go away. Right. So again, like totally guilty of all of this. Like when I was in the depths of my struggles, I just kept telling myself like, okay, maybe I'll outgrow this. Right. Or maybe with age, like I'll gain wisdom and discipline and I'll conquer this. Or, the biggest lie of all was like, I thought that maybe if I could just like finally hit my goal weight, then all of this would be a non-issue. I'm like, oh, if I'm skinny, like I won't have to deal with any of this. Again, those are the words I was using. But that was completely wrong. Like if you really want to unlearn years or decades of the diet mentality or disordered eating or a really self-critical self-image, or maybe it's all of the above, like if you truly want to heal this, you need a sustainable framework in place, and your brain needs to learn a new language to speak like we talked about. That is the missing piece. And yeah, wisdom and discernment are part of that framework. But if knowledge and wisdom alone were enough, like this would have been solved a long time ago. Let's be real, right? And again, like this is not about making you feel bad or embarrassed or anything like that, right? It's just about showing you the possibility of what can happen when you learn and implement and follow a sustainable framework that reprograms your brain. Okay. Because just like me, like you've been taught an incomplete math formula and it makes losing weight just like strictly this eat less, move more equation. But on top of that, like it's convinced you that there's something wrong with you when it inevitably doesn't work. But that's not true. Like you're just simply addressing the wrong problem. And again, don't feel bad because I did the same thing for decades. So, like, let's talk about the real problem, right? So, what's the real problem that needs to be solved? Well, again, broken record, sorry, not sorry. It's the wiring in your brain, right? The brain that got fired and wired to always think about food and try to control yourself around food or just feel out of control of food, right? The brain that got fired and wired to just like let your scale weight or your jeans got size or your calorie count dictate your self esteem for the day, right? Or the brain that's practiced just like a skewed mindset about what's healthy or unhealthy or good or bad, right? Or the brain that learned to do anything to make the scale move a few pounds, even if it means sacrificing your health or your happiness. But when you heal the self image and you heal the identity and you just become the version of yourself that just thinks this way, that's when everything changes. Okay. That's when you can just like really heal from the disorder and end the dieting madness and stop playing an unwinnable game. Okay. That's when you can learn this new language that I speak of and a new framework so that food, it just doesn't define you and it definitely doesn't own you and control you. Right. And that's where you can just, like I said, learn it once and have it forever, as in, invest the time and energy and heart and soul one time. And then just bring that with you everywhere you go and then simply have it forever. Right. But again, this won't happen with a diet and this won't happen with an exercise plan. You must rewire your brain and self-image and heal the real problem. You've got to rewire your brain and reverse the brain damage of chronic dieting. Okay. That's what needs to happen. And again, I'm just getting really real. Okay. So now I'm going to turn it over to you. Okay. Just think about it. Like what would happen if you simply gave yourself permission to ditch the dieting and the restricting and the weighing and the measuring and taught your brain the patterns and a recipe for freedom, right? What would happen if you stopped just like hating on yourself and shaming your body and focusing on what you don't like? And focus that time and energy on healing and rewiring your brain, right? And what would happen if you ditched the unhealthy obsession with food or your weight and started kind of like healthfully obsessing over your brain, right? What if you explored healing your own struggles and reversed your own brain damage from the chronic dieting and rewired your brain, right? And what if you stopped believing that dieting would be the solution to get you there and that it was something that you even wanted to get better at, right? Especially if you've only experienced the diet mentality leading you to frustration and stress and self-doubt, right? Again, I know it's definitely not easy if you've been living on this roller coaster or living the opposite day in, day out for as long as you can remember, but it's something I definitely invite you to try on. Okay. Remember, struggling is inevitable. That's going to happen, but the suffering is optional, right? You do not have to suffer. So I say choose freedom and find the love and just set yourself free. Okay. Trust me when I say you have nothing to lose and everything to gain. Okay. So I'm Leanne Ellington. That's it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time. Bye.